It's a strange thing to plan your own funeral, but it's an entirely different level of strange when you're doing it all while you are very much alive, hiding in plain sight, just to see if the only person you have left in this world will even bother to show up. I discovered something far worse. My daughter, Jessica, wasn't just planning to skip my funeral. She and her weasel of a husband had already declared me dead and were trying to drain my accounts before the casket was even chosen. They just forgot one tiny little detail: to check if I had a pulse. If you're ready for this journey, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this a like so you don't miss the updates. And let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. It's always lovely to see where everyone is. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Carol, and for the last 40 years, my life was beautifully, predictably ordinary. I was married to the love of my life, David, a man with a quiet strength and a laugh that could make the sourest lemon taste sweet. We built a life together in a comfortable two-story colonial in suburban Ohio. We raised our daughter, Jessica, in that house. We celebrated her straight A's, cried when she scraped her knees, and beamed with pride when she went off to college, the first in my family to do so. David was a financial planner, a meticulous one, and he made sure we were more than comfortable. He used to say, "Carol, we're not rich, but we'll never be poor. I'll make sure of that, even after I'm gone." And he did. When David passed away from a sudden heart attack 5 years ago, my world tilted on its axis. The grief was a physical thing, a heavy cloak I couldn't seem to take off. But through that fog, I knew David had left me secure. He left behind a meticulously organized portfolio, the house paid in full, and a life insurance policy that meant I would never have to worry about money a day in my life. He left me everything. Our wills were simple, mirrored. When he died, it all went to me. When I die, it all goes to our only child, Jessica. Simple, clean, or so I thought. Jessica had married her college boyfriend, Greg. I never much cared for him, if I'm being honest. He had what my mother used to call shifty eyes. He was a consultant, one of those vague jobs where they make a lot of PowerPoints but don't seem to produce much of anything concrete. He was always talking about his next big venture, his sure-thing investment, the crypto this or the startup that. It all sounded like smoke and mirrors to me, but Jessica was smitten. She saw him as a visionary, a bold risk-taker. I saw him as a man who would rather talk about getting rich than actually do the hard work it takes. After David died, Jessica's calls became a little more frequent, which was nice at first, but the conversation always seemed to drift to the same place. "Mom, are you managing okay with all of Dad's accounts? It can be so complicated." Or, "Greg was saying you should really be moving some of that money into more aggressive funds. You could be making so much more." I'd always politely shut it down. "Carol, your father knew what he was doing, sweetheart. His plan is to keep me safe, not to make me a millionaire overnight." The real trouble started about 8 months ago. I had a bad fall. I was reaching for a book on a high shelf, a silly, preventable accident, and ended up with a broken hip. The surgery was successful, but the recovery at 67 is no walk in the park. It was a long, painful process. Jessica and Greg lived 3 hours away, and they drove in to help. Their version of helping was mostly them sitting in my living room, drinking my good coffee, and talking in hushed tones whenever I entered the room. One afternoon, Greg sat down next to my recliner, a folder in his hand and a slick, sympathetic smile on his face. "Carol," he started, and I already hated the way he used my first name, like we were business partners. "We were thinking, this house, it's a lot for you to manage, especially now. And with your health scare, well, it's got us worried about your future." He opened the folder. It was filled with brochures for assisted living facilities. Not just any facilities, but the most expensive, gold-plated, quote-unquote luxury retirement communities you could imagine. The kind with valet parking and a concierge. The kind that costs more per month than my mortgage used to cost for a year. And, he continued, flipping a page, we've also taken the liberty of speaking with a financial advisor, a friend of mine, very sharp, who can help consolidate your assets. It would be much simpler if everything was in a single trust, with a co-trustee to help you manage things, just in case you're not able. I knew exactly what he was getting at. The co-trustee, of course, would be him or Jessica. It was a power grab, cloaked in the language of concern. Carol, I said, my voice as firm as I could make it from my chair, I appreciate your research, but I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs, and I am not leaving my home. This is where your father and I built our life. He looked at Jessica, who just wrung her hands and gave me a sad puppy look. Mom, we're just worried. What if this happens again? What if it's worse next time? We want to make sure you're taken care of. That's the phrase, isn't it? Taken care of. It sounds so kind, so benevolent. But what they meant was, we want to take care of your money. I held my ground, and after a tense weekend, they left. The temperature of our relationship dropped a few degrees after that. The calls became less frequent again, more strained. I know this part is hard to hear, but it's important. The truth was about to come out, and it was going to be glorious. The real bombshell landed 2 months ago. It started with a phone call from my bank. A lovely woman named Brenda, from the FRAD department, who I'd spoken with a few times over the years. Mrs. Miller, she said, her voice laced with professional concern, I'm calling about a wire transfer request we received this morning. It's for a rather substantial amount, and we just wanted to verify it with you verbally. I was sitting at my kitchen table, looking out at the bird feeder. A wired transfer? I haven't requested any transfer, Brenda. There was a pause. Oh, well, that's why we call. The request was submitted online, but it was flagged by our security system. The recipient is a company called Innovest Holdings, LLC. The name sounded vaguely familiar. It took me a moment to place it. It was one of Greg's ventures. He'd been crowing about it on his Facebook page for weeks. And Brenda, I asked, a cold knot forming in my stomach, how much was the transfer for? $150,000, ma'am. I nearly dropped the phone. It was an audacious, breathtaking amount. But that wasn't the worst part. Okay, Brenda, she continued, lowering her voice slightly. The reason it was flagged, Mrs. Miller? The transfer was accompanied by a scanned document. It was a power of attorney, giving your son-in-law, Gregory Peterson, full authority over your accounts. We have your signature on file, of course, and it looked a bit off. And there was one other document attached. What was it? I asked, though I think a part of me already knew. Brenda cleared her throat. It was the sound of someone about to deliver terrible news. Ma'am, she said gently, it was a death certificate. It was a state-issued certificate declaring you deceased as of last Tuesday. I sat there in my sunny kitchen, birds chirping outside, a cup of tea growing cold in my hand, and learned that according to my daughter and her husband, I was already dead. They hadn't just tried to rob me, they had erased me. They had taken my life, not with a weapon, but with a piece of paper. And in that moment, the grief and the shock hardened into something else, something cold and clear and incredibly sharp. It was rage, and from that rage, a plan began to form. A ridiculous, theatrical, and utterly necessary plan. If they wanted me dead, I'd be dead. But I'd do it on my own terms, and I'd make sure they attended the funeral. My hand was shaking so hard, I had to put the phone down on its cradle. Yes, I still have a landline, a lovely old princess phone in the kitchen. I sat there in stunned silence, the sound of Brenda's words echoing in my head. Death certificate. Deceased. The birds at the feeder seemed to mock me with their cheerful, oblivious chirping. A blue jay swooped in and scattered the sparrows. For a moment, I felt like one of them, scattered and small. But then the quiet rage began to boil. David didn't work his entire life planning and saving for some PowerPoint peddling parasite like Greg to siphon it away into a sham company. And Jessica, my little girl, the one I taught to ride a bike and helped her with her algebra homework. How could she do this? The thought was a physical pain, sharper than my broken hip had ever been. It was a betrayal so profound, it felt like it hollowed me out from the inside. My first coherent thought wasn't one of revenge, not yet. It was one of defense, like an animal protecting its den, my den, the one that David had built for me. I called my bank back. "Brenda," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "I need you to freeze every single account I have. Put a password on them that's so complicated, only a cryptographer could solve it. Nothing goes in, nothing goes out without me physically walking into your branch with 2 forms of photo ID and my own birth certificate. Can you do that for me?" Brenda, bless her heart, went into full warrior mode. "Absolutely, Mrs. Miller. I'm putting a complete lockdown on everything right now. I'll need to file a formal fraud report, and we'll work with the authorities. This is a very serious crime."
"I know," I said, "and we'll get to the authorities. But first, I need to make another call." That call was to Arthur Vance. Arthur had been David's estate lawyer and a friend for 30 years. He's a cranky old coot in his late 70s, wears bow ties, and has a mind like a steel trap. He'd known Jessica since she was in pigtails. When he answered the phone with his usual gruff, "Vance," I just said, "Arthur, it's Carol. I need to see you. Now. Someone has forged my death certificate." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then, a low rumble. "I'll put the coffee on. Don't ye dare drive. Take a cab." An hour later, I was sitting in his leather wingback chair, which smelled faintly of old books and pipe tobacco. I told him everything: the assisted living ambush, the attempts to get their hands on my finances, and the final, shocking phone call from Brenda. When I was finished, he took off his glasses, polished them with a handkerchief with an intensity I'd never seen before, and stared at the wall for a full minute. "The unmitigated gall," he finally said, his voice quiet but seething. "To file a fraudulent death certificate, Carol? This isn't just theft. This is a Class 4 felony in this state. They could do serious prison time for this." "I know," I said, "and part of me wants to see them in orange jumpsuits, but a bigger part of me wants them to understand, on a cellular level, what they've done." Arthur raised a bushy eyebrow. "And how do you propose to do that?" I took a deep breath. "They think I'm dead, Arthur. Let's not rush to correct them. They've planned my death, so I'm going to plan my funeral." He stared at me as if I'd just suggested we took up alligator wrestling. "Carol, what in God's name are you talking about? This is a legal matter, not a theater production." "It's both," I insisted, leaning forward. "Don't you see? They've handed me the perfect weapon. They want my money. They'll have to mourn me for it first. We let the news of my tragic, sudden passing get out. We schedule a service. We'll see if they even have the decency to put on a black dress and shed a crocodile tear before they race to the bank with a probate lawyer." He was about to get exactly what he deserved, and I had a front row seat. "Don't go anywhere." Arthur sat back, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. It was the grin he got right before he eviscerated some poor lawyer in a deposition. "It's insane. It's borderline unethical. It's possibly illegal in 12 different ways I haven't even thought of yet." He let the grin widen. "I love it. But we have to be smart, incredibly smart." And so, the war room was established in Arthur's dusty law office. Step 1, he said, was to create what he called a legal firewall. He moved all my liquid assets into a new set of accounts at a different bank under a newly formed trust that he controlled. The trust's name was the Phoenix Foundation. A little on the nose, maybe, but it made me smile. My house was also put into the trust. Legally, Carol Miller was now a woman with no assets to her name. Everything belonged to the Phoenix. Greg and Jessica would be trying to drain an empty well. Step 2 was bringing in my best friend Eleanor. Ellie has been my partner in crime since we were room moms in kindergarten. She's a retired nurse, fiercely loyal, and has a wicked sense of humor. When I told her the plan over tea in her sunroom, I decamped to her spare bedroom for my disappearance. She choked on her scone. "He did what?" she shrieked, spraying crumbs across the table. Once the shock wore off, she got the same dangerous glint in her eye that Arthur had. "Oh, that little worm. And Jessica. Carol, I'm so sorry. But yes. Oh my God, yes. We have to do this. I'll bake for the reception. My lemon bars are to die for." The pun was terrible, and we both burst into laughter, a wild, slightly hysterical sound. It felt good to laugh. The next few weeks were a blur of clandestine activity. I was a ghost in my own life. Eleanor did my grocery shopping. I paid for everything in cash. We worked out of Arthur's back office. Our first order of business was to craft my obituary. It was the most bizarre and empowering thing I've ever written. Carol Ann Miller, 67, passed away peacefully at her home, it began. I made sure to mention my beloved late husband David, my passion for gardening, and my lifelong dedication to the local animal shelter. For Jessica, I wrote a single, sterile line. She is survived by her daughter Jessica Peterson and her son-in-law, Greg. No lovingly survived by, no cherished daughter, just the facts. It was a perfectly coded message that would mean nothing to strangers, but would be a slap in the face to her. Then came the funeral home. Arthur knew a guy, of course, a third-generation funeral director named Mr. Abernathy, a man so discreet he made a Swiss banker look like a town crier. Arthur explained the situation in vague, lawyerly terms as an unconventional family matter requiring the utmost privacy and a certain flexibility. He handed over a cashier's check that was substantial enough to ensure Mr. Abernathy's full and unquestioning cooperation. I chose a simple, elegant casket. "The mahogany looks nice," I told him, trying not to think about the fact that I was picking out my own box.
The final piece of the puzzle was letting Jessica know her mother was dead. Arthur insisted on handling it. It had to come from an official source, and as my longtime lawyer, he was perfect. We set the date for a Friday afternoon. He would call her then. The obituary would run in the local paper's online edition on Saturday morning. The funeral would be scheduled for the following Wednesday, giving them just enough time to get their affairs in order and make the drive. I sat next to Arthur on speakerphone when he made the call. I held my breath, my heart pounding against my ribs. Jessica picked up on the third ring. "Jessica Peterson?" Her voice was crisp, businesslike. "Jessica, this is Arthur Vance. I was your father's attorney." "Oh yes, Arthur. Is something wrong?" No warmth, just impatience. "I'm afraid I have some very difficult news," Arthur said, his voice dripping with solemnity. "It's about your mother. There was an incident, a fall. I'm so very sorry to tell you that she passed away this morning." There was a pause. Not a gasp, not a sob. Just a beat of silence. I could picture her on the other end, her mind working, gears turning. "Oh," she said finally. Her voice was flat, emotionless. "I see. Was it quick?" "Yes, very peaceful." Another pause. Then the words that broke the last tiny piece of my heart. "Okay," she said, her voice shifting, becoming a little more alert. "Okay, well, thank you for letting me know. I suppose
I suppose there will be arrangements to be made regarding the estate. That was it. That was her first question. Not, what happened? Not, are you sure? But, what about the money? Arthur, the consummate professional, outlined the fake details, the funeral home, the time of the service. She said she and Greg would be there. After he hung up, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I didn't cry. I was past tears. All I felt was a cold, hard certainty. I was doing the right thing. The trap was set, the cheese was on the spring, and the rats were on their way. The days between that phone call and the funeral were the longest of my life. I was living in Eleanor's guest room, which she had fussily decorated with lavender potpourri and far too many pillows. It was a cozy little prison. During the day, I'd wander her house like a specter, catching my own reflection in a mirror and feeling a jolt of surprise. It was the face of a dead woman. It was a strange, disembodying feeling. I read books, I watched old movies, I helped Ellie bake, but my mind was always somewhere else. It was in my house, with them. Arthur, bless his crotchety, brilliant soul, hit the ground running. "We can't be blind, Carol," he had said on Saturday morning, holding up a finger. "We need eyes and ears. I'm hiring a man." The man was Frank, a retired police detective who now ran a private investigation agency. He was a quiet, unassuming guy you wouldn't look at twice in a grocery store, which, I suppose, is the point of being a PI. His first job was simple: watch my house. Jessica and Greg arrived on Saturday afternoon, just as the obituary went live online. Frank, parked down the street in a nondescript sedan, sent Arthur a text. "They're here. Black SUV. Unloading suitcases." I pictured them walking into my home, filled with photos of David, of Jessica as a gap-toothed first grader, of all of us on vacations to the Grand Canyon and the Outer Banks. I felt a wave of nausea. Their first stop, according to Frank's report, wasn't to look at photos or sit quietly in remembrance of their supposedly deceased mother. No, Greg was on his phone before they even brought the second suitcase inside. An hour later, a man in a polo shirt with a real estate agency's logo embroidered on it showed up with a lockbox for the front door. He was a realtor. They were getting the house appraised before I was even in the ground.
But it gets better. On Monday morning, Arthur got a frantic call from the new bank, the one managing the Phoenix Foundation Trust. A man named Gregory Peterson had called, claiming to have power of attorney for the estate of the late Carol Miller, and was demanding to know why all the funds had been moved. The manager, a sharp woman Arthur had personally briefed, politely informed Greg that Mrs. Miller's assets had been placed in a private trust several weeks prior, and she, unfortunately, could not disclose any information about that trust to him. Arthur, relaying this to me, chuckled. I would have paid good money to have heard that call. The sputtering, the indignant rage. Apparently, Greg had threatened to sue. The bank manager had coolly replied, "You do what you feel you must, sir," and hung up. The aha moment for them must have been spectacular. They must have realized that the well was dry. They had a death certificate for a woman whose assets had vanished before she died. The panic must have been setting in. Frank's report from that day was telling. Greg spent most of the afternoon pacing on my front lawn, yelling into his phone. Jessica, Frank noted, sat on the front porch steps chain-smoking, a habit I thought she'd quit years ago. Good. Let them panic. Let them sweat. And just when he thought he had me backed into a corner, he forgot who he was dealing with. Stick with me, because you'll want to see how this plays out. The lowest blow came on Tuesday, the day before the funeral. Frank sent over a photo that made my blood run cold. It was a picture of my rose garden.
David had planted that garden for me on our 10th anniversary, a collection of antique tea roses he'd spent years cultivating. In the photo, half the bushes were gone, dug up. A quick search by Frank found them listed for sale on a local gardening group on Facebook. Established, mature, heirloom rose bushes, buyer must dig up and transport, $100 each. They were selling my husband's memory for a couple of $100. Eleanor found me sitting in her kitchen, staring at the photo on my tablet, tears streaming down my face. She didn't say a word. She just put her arms around me, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I let myself sob. Not for my own betrayal, but for David's roses. It was such a small thing in the grand scheme of it all, but it felt like the most vicious desecration. They weren't just after my money, they were erasing every trace of the life we had built. That night, my sadness hardened back into resolve. This wasn't just about catching them, it was about honoring David. It was about protecting our life's work from these vultures. The next morning, the day of my funeral, was brilliantly, cruelly sunny. Eleanor and I got up early. My disguise was simple: a tasteful charcoal gray suit, low heels, a pair of non-prescription glasses with a stylish frame, and a wide-brim hat with a dark veil that would obscure my face. But the masterstroke was the wig, a cheek salt and pepper bob. Looking in the mirror, I was a stranger to myself. I looked like one of my sophisticated friends from book club, not plain old Carol Miller. I practiced pitching my voice a little lower, a little huskier. We drove to the funeral home separately. Eleanor went first to play the role of the grieving best friend and to make sure everything was in place. Mr. Abernathy, true to his word, had been a rock of discretion. The casket, a beautiful mahogany I'd ironically picked out myself, would be closed. He'd explained to early arrivals that it was at the family's request due to the tragic nature of the fall. It was a perfect excuse. He had also, for a generous security and technology fee, installed a tiny, high-definition camera in a floral arrangement near the casket, feeding a live video and audio stream to an iPad I now held in my gloved hands. I parked a block away and walked towards the Abernathy and Sons funeral home. My heart was a hummingbird in my chest. This was it. The curtain was about to go up on the most bizarre play of my life, and I was the ghost, the director, and the star witness. From the screen of the iPad, I could see the viewing room. It was filled with tasteful flower arrangements from friends who had seen the obituary. My friends. People who actually cared. In the corner, next to my closed casket, stood Jessica and Greg. She was in a poorly fitting black dress, looking bored and irritated. Greg was in a suit a size too small, looking shifty as ever, constantly checking his watch. He looked less like a grieving son-in-law and more like a man waiting for a bus that was late. I took a deep breath, adjusted the ridiculous veiled hat, and pushed open the heavy oak doors of the funeral home. I signed the guest book as Irene Adler, a little nod to Sherlock Holmes that I knew Arthur would appreciate. Then I stepped into the room to attend the funeral of Carol Miller. I was about to find out how many people had come to mourn me and to watch with my very own eyes the performance of the two people who wished I was in that box.
I walked into the room and the scent of lilies and carnations, the official flowers of death, hit me like a wall. It was my funeral, and they had ordered my least favorite flowers. Of course they had. The room wasn't packed, but it was respectable. My bridge club was there, occupying a full 2 rows. A few neighbors, dabbing their eyes. My friends from the animal shelter. These were the people who knew me, who knew my love for a good joke, my weakness for chocolate lava cake, and my absolute hatred of lilies. Their grief was real, a soft, quiet hum of sadness in the room. I felt a pang of guilt for putting them through this, but it was quickly eclipsed by the sight of my daughter.
From my vantage point near the back, I watched them on the iPad screen, a godlike view of the two people who thought they had inherited the world. Greg kept patting Jessica's arm in a gesture that was meant to look comforting, but was really a proprietary signal. Mine, mine, mine. She, in turn, kept glancing around the room, not with sadness, but with a sort of agitated appraisal, as if she were counting the house at a poorly attended play. Eleanor, a true actress, was playing the part of the devastated best friend flawlessly. She had a handkerchief clutched in her hand and approached Jessica, her voice thick with emotion. "Jessica, darling, I can't believe it. It was so sudden." I watched on my screen as Jessica gave her a brisk, awkward hug. "I know, Eleanor. It's been a real shock," she said, her voice as hollow as a drum. "We're just trying to get through it." Greg put his arm around Jessica. "We appreciate everyone coming. Carol, Mom, wouldn't have wanted a big fuss." "Oh, you bet your fraudulent death certificate I wouldn't have wanted a fuss, Greg, especially not one you were hosting." I started to mingle, keeping to the edges of the room. A woman from my book club, Martha, turned to me, her eyes red. "It's just so awful," she sniffled, assuming I was a distant relative or an old colleague. "Carol was supposed to host us next month. We were going to read that new historical fiction everyone's talking about." "She sounds like she was a wonderful friend," I said, my disguised voice sounding alien to my own ears. "Oh, she was the best," Martha said, a real tear rolling down her cheek. "The absolute best." My heart ached. This was real. The love these people had for me was real. And it was the love Jessica and Greg were trampling on with their muddy, greedy boots. I focused my attention back on the iPad. They were whispering again, huddled close to the mahogany casket. I pressed my earbud in deeper. "Can't believe Arthur locked down the accounts," Greg was hissing, his back to the room. "The trust is airtight. The Phoenix Foundation? What the hell is that? Sounds like something out of a bad spy movie." "Maybe she did it months ago," Jessica whispered back, her voice tight with panic. "Maybe she knew we were helping." "Helping? They'll call it fraud, Jess. That idiot lawyer she has, Vance, he's probably already talking to the DA. The death certificate was a mistake. We moved too fast." "Don't you put this on me," she hissed back. "The crypto whatever you invested in went belly up, and you got desperate. It's a sure thing, Jess. We'll pay it all back before she even notices." That's what you said. So that was it. A bad investment. They had tried to rob me, to erase me, to cover Greg's gambling debts. It was all so grubby, so pathetic. I know this part is hard to hear, but it's important. The truth was about to come out, and it was going to be glorious. Just then, Mr. Abernathy stepped to the podium at the front of the room. "The family would like to thank you all for coming. Gregory Peterson, Carol's son-in-law, would like to say a few words." Oh, this was going to be rich. I found an empty chair in the last row and sat down, my back ramrod straight. Greg strode to the podium and unfolded a piece of paper. He cleared his throat, adjusting the microphone and trying to look solemn. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice oozing a counterfeit sincerity that made my skin crawl. "To celebrate the life of a truly unique woman, Carol Miller, my mother-in-law." He paused, looking down as if trying to compose himself. It was a good performance, I'll give him that. Carol was a woman of simple tastes. She lived a quiet life. She wasn't one for the complexities of the modern world. In a lot of ways, she was from another time, a time of handwritten letters and Sunday drives. He was painting me as a doddering old fool, a relic who couldn't possibly manage her own affairs. The nerve! "Her last months were difficult," he continued, his voice catching slightly. "Her fall took a toll, not just on her body, but on her spirit. We worried constantly. We wanted to provide her with the best care, to see her safe and secure. But Carol, in her own way, was stubborn. He chuckled, a condescending little sound. She wanted her independence. We only wish we could have done more, that we'd had more time.
He looked directly at Jessica, who managed to squeeze out a single perfect tear. The timing was impeccable. "She will be missed," he concluded, folding the paper. "We take comfort in knowing she is finally at peace, reunited with her beloved David, and we will do our best to honor her memory." He walked back to his seat to a smattering of soft, sympathetic applause. The lies he had spun hung in the air, thick and suffocating. He hadn't shared a single real memory. He hadn't mentioned my laugh, my work at the shelter, my love of terrible old black and white movies. He had eulogized a caricature, a helpless old woman whose only defining feature was the money she was leaving behind. The service concluded, and as people began to stand up and file out, I saw Arthur slip in through a side door and give me a subtle nod. It was almost time. Mr. Abernathy stepped back up to the podium. "The family would like to invite everyone to continue sharing their memories of Carol at a reception immediately following the service," he announced, his voice clear and professional. "It will be held at her home." I watched Jessica and Greg on the screen. Their heads snapped up. I could see the flash of pure panic in their eyes. A reception. At the house. The house where they had already put up a realtor's lockbox and started selling the rose bushes. They exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated horror. They were trapped. They couldn't possibly refuse their own mother's funeral reception. Theatrically, they nodded their consent to Mr. Abernathy. I stood up, pulling the veil down a bit further. Eleanor met me at the back of the room, her eyes blazing. "That lying sack of garbage," she muttered under her breath. "Reunited with David. David would have thrown him through a plate glass window." "Patience, Elle," I murmured back. "The second act is about to begin." We slipped out the side door where Arthur was waiting with his car. I got into the back seat, pulling off the veiled hat and the itchy wig, my own silver hair feeling like a relief. I was Carol Miller again. "Everything is in place," Arthur said, pulling out into the light traffic. "Frank the PI is at the house, posing as a caterer's assistant. He's made sure their realtor's lockbox is misplaced." I looked at my own reflection in the car window, the face of a dead woman coming back to life. "How do they look?" I asked Arthur. He glanced in the rearview mirror, a grim smile on his face. "Like two people who just realized the ghost they're pretending to mourn is about to come back and haunt the hell out of them." He was right. We were heading to my house, my reception. The stage was set, the guests were on their way, and the guest of honor was ready to make her grand entrance. We drove the few blocks to my house in a tense, buzzing silence. Pulling up a street over, Arthur handed me the iPad again. Through Frank's hidden cameras, one in a bookshelf, one in the kitchen, I could see my own home now set up for a party I was supposed to be dead for. Frank, dressed in a white shirt and black trousers, was directing two young women from the catering company Eleanor had hired. On my dining room table, where my family had shared countless Thanksgiving dinners, were platters of sandwiches, fruit, and, in the place of honor, Eleanor's infamous lemon bars. It was surreal. We slipped in through the back door. Seeing my kitchen, my things, my life still in its place sent a tremor through me. It felt like coming home after a long, terrible journey. Frank met us in the mudroom, his face impassive. "They'll be here any minute," he said in a low voice, along with the first of the guests. "The realtor's lockbox has been retired." And I took the liberty of getting a few photos of the dug-up rose bushes, time-stamped, of course. He handed Arthur a slim file. "Evidence." "Good man, Frank. Now, for your last act. You're a bartender. Stick around. You might be needed to bear witness." Frank just nodded. Our small conspiracy, the ghost, the lawyer, the best friend, and the spy, was in place. "Where do you want to be?" Eleanor whispered to me.
I looked towards my husband's study, the one room they would never dare to enter while guests were around, filled as it was with his imposing desk and law books. "In David's office," I said. "I'll watch from there. Leave the door cracked open." The doorbell rang. My stomach jumped into my throat. The first of the mourners had arrived. Eleanor went to play hostess, while Arthur positioned himself near the living room entrance, looking every bit the grim, official executor of the estate. I slipped into the study, took a seat in David's big leather chair, and turned my eyes to the iPad, which was now my window into my own wake. For 20 minutes, the house filled with the soft, murmuring sounds of sympathy. My friends hugged Eleanor. They told stories about me. Martha, from my book club, was telling a small group about the time I tried to bake a ridiculously complicated French pastry and ended up covering half my kitchen in flour, and they all laughed a gentle, sad laugh. It was everything a wake should be, a celebration of a life, a sharing of memories. Then, they arrived.
Jessica and Greg walked in the front door and stopped dead. The house was full of people. People who were eating sandwiches and drinking iced tea in a home they clearly expected to be empty and silent. Greg's face went pale. Jessica's was a mask of rigid anxiety. They were trapped. They had to play the part. Eleanor, a goddess of passive aggression, swept towards them. "Oh, there you are," she said, loud enough for half the room to hear. "I was so worried. I just had to open up the house. It's what Carol would have wanted, isn't it? For all her friends to be here, in her home, one last time." Jessica could only nod, a jerky, puppet-like motion. Greg tried to smile, but it looked more like a grimace. "Of course, Eleanor, so thoughtful of you." They moved awkwardly through the room, accepting condolences, their eyes darting around like cornered animals. I watched Greg's gaze sweep over the silver candlesticks on the mantel, the small painting my mother had done, the antique clock. He was taking inventory. Even now, he was calculating. After another 10 minutes, when the room was at its fullest, Arthur clapped his hands together, a sharp, commanding sound that cut through the chatter. "Friends, neighbors," he began, his voice projecting through the house. "Could I have your attention for a moment?" The room fell silent. Everyone turned to face him. Jessica and Greg, caught near the dining room table, looked like they wanted the floor to swallow them whole. "As many of you know, I was Carol and David's attorney for many years," Arthur said, his tone somber. "In the light of Carol's sudden passing, she had certain instructions that she left with me, to be carried out in the event of her death. Specifically, she insisted on a reading of her will, here, in her home, among her friends. She said she wanted no ambiguity." I could see Greg's shoulders relax just a fraction. This was it, the prize. He thought he was about to be validated. Jessica, however, looked like she was going to be sick. She knew something was wrong. A mother's intuition, I suppose. It's a shame hers only worked when money was on the line. Arthur pulled a document from his breast pocket. "This is the last will and testament of Carol Ann Miller, updated and signed just 6 weeks ago." That hit them. 6 weeks. Right after their little assisted living ambush, Greg's face went from pale to a pasty shade of gray. Arthur began to read. He skipped the legal preamble and went straight to the heart of it. "To my dear friends, my bridge club, my fellow volunteers at the shelter, I leave fond memories and my eternal gratitude. I ask you each to take a book from my shelves as a memento of our time together." He paused, letting that sink in. Then he turned his page. "As for my tangible assets, this house, my savings, my investment portfolio, and the entirety of the estate left to me by my beloved husband David, I have made different arrangements." He looked up, his eyes locking onto Jessica and Greg. "Prior to my death, I established a charitable trust,
The Phoenix Foundation. 100% of my assets, with no exceptions, have been transferred to this foundation. Its purpose will be twofold. First, to provide a significant annual donation to the North Hill Animal Shelter in David's name. And second, to fund a new legal aid program dedicated to protecting senior citizens from financial fraud, particularly fraud perpetrated by their own family members. A collective gasp went through the room. It was beautiful. My friends were looking at Jessica and Greg, the pieces clicking into place in their minds. "But what about Jessica?" Martha from the book club called out, confused. "Her own daughter." Arthur looked at the will again. "Ah, yes, here it is. To my daughter Jessica Peterson and her husband Greg Peterson, I leave the following." He paused dramatically, lifting his glasses to peer at the page. "I leave them the sum of $1 each so that they cannot contest this will on the grounds of having been forgotten. I also leave them with the knowledge that I was not a fool. I see you, I know what you did, and you will not profit from it." The silence in the room was absolute, profound. It was broken by Greg. "This is insane," he spluttered, his voice cracking. "She was not of sound mind. She was sick. She was confused. We were taking care of her. This lawyer, this ambulance chaser, he manipulated her." Jessica finally found her voice. "He's right," she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at Arthur. "My mother would never do this. We loved her." And that was my cue. I pushed open the study door and walked out into the living room. "Greg," I said, my voice calm and clear and very, very alive. "Your eulogy was very moving. A little short on facts, but very moving."
Time seemed to stop. Every head in the room swiveled towards me. There were shrieks, gasps, a dropped teacup that shattered on the hardwood floor. My bridge club friends looked like they'd seen a ghost, which, in a way, they had. But I only had eyes for two people. Greg's jaw had dropped so far he could have caught flies. His face, a moment ago gray, was now the color of curdled milk. Jessica was worse. All the blood drained from her face, and she let out a strangled, whimpering sound, like a dying animal. She stumbled backward, bumping into the dining room table, her eyes wide with a terror that was almost pitiable. "Mom?" she whispered, the word a tiny, disbelieving puff of air. "Hello, Jessica," I said, walking slowly towards them. I felt a strange sense of calm, the eye of the hurricane. "Surprised to see me?" "How?" Greg stammered. "The death certificate, He stopped, realizing what he'd just admitted in a room full of witnesses. "The death certificate you forged," I asked sweetly. "The wire transfer for $150,000 you tried to send to your sham company? The power of attorney with my signature you faked? Or were you going to mention selling my husband's rose bushes for pocket money while you were waiting for me to be buried?" With every question, a new wave of murmurs and horrified gasps went through the room. My friends were no longer sad or confused. Their faces were hardening with anger on my behalf. "I don't know what you're talking about," Greg blustered, trying to regain some footing. You're crazy. This is a setup." "Yes, it is," Arthur said, stepping forward. "And you walked right into it. Frank?" Frank, my PI bartender, put down the cocktail shaker he was holding and pulled out his phone. He held it up. "Mr. Peterson, I am a licensed private investigator. For the last 5 days, you and your wife have been under surveillance. We have documented your attempt to access Mrs. Miller's now empty accounts. We have the testimony from the bank's fraud department. We have photographs of you meeting with the realtor. And," he added with a thin smile, "we have the recording of your little chat by the casket at the funeral home." Jessica let out a choked sob and finally crumpled, sinking into a chair, her face in her hands. Greg lunged for her. He screamed, his face a grotesque mask of fury. "Your idea! He's my father! I deserve that money! You are the one pushing me!"
It was the last pathetic act of a coward trying to take someone else down with him. And just as his spittle-flecked tirade reached its peak, the doorbell rang again. Frank opened it to reveal two uniformed police officers. "Gregory and Jessica Peterson?" the officer asked, his voice calm but firm. "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of conspiracy, fraud, and attempted grand larceny." It was over. Watching them being handcuffed and let out of my house past the faces of all the friends they had lied to was not as triumphant as I thought it would be. There was no joy in seeing my daughter, my only child, so thoroughly broken, but there was a profound, quiet sense of justice, of the world being set right again. When the police car pulled away, the house was silent for a moment. Then Eleanor was by my side, wrapping me in a fierce hug. Soon I was surrounded by my friends, all talking at once, touching my arm, their faces a mixture of relief, shock, and love. The next day, Arthur filed for a formal restraining order and began the legal proceedings that would, eventually, send both Greg and Jessica to prison for a few years. It turned out Greg had a history of shady dealings, and this was the final nail in his coffin. Jessica, for her cooperation, got a lighter sentence. I have not spoken to her since. The daughter I raised died that day. A new, unrecognizable person was arrested in my dining room. In the end, they didn't get $1. The Phoenix Foundation is now fully operational, and every year on the anniversary of David's death, I get to hand a very large check to the animal shelter. And every day, a team of lawyers Arthur oversees helps protect other older people from the kind of nightmare I lived through. I kept my house, I replanted the rose garden, my friends come over for book club and bridge, and sometimes, when the light is just right in the afternoon, I'll sit in my husband's study, look out at the world he helped me build, and feel a sense of peace. I was a ghost at my own funeral. I listened to my own eulogy, and I came back to life not for revenge, but for myself. I am Carol Miller, and I am very, very much alive.
My grandmother told me this story. Thanks for watching this video. Bye bye!